Okay, so we've spent most of the semester going through basically all life on the planet and how it's categorized into the various phyla, and we've looked at everything from the simplest forms from the prokaryotes all the way up to the most complex, being humans. So now we're going to start talking about how all of those things interact with each other and with the abiotic surroundings that they live in. So that is called ecology. So today we're going to talk about community and ecosystems. Okay, so let's talk about ecology itself. That is the branch of biology that deals with the relationships of organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings. And so how ecology and communities are organized, basically if we're looking at this slide here, we're going to look at the smallest level of organization all the way up to the largest in that order. So we have the individual, and that's similar organisms that can mate, or species, and then the population, which is groups of species that live in the same area. And then community is populations that live together in a slightly larger defined area. Ecosystems are all the organisms that live in a similar area along with the non-living material. So ecosystem is where we start to introduce the physical features of it as well. And then the biome are the groups of ecosystems that are in similar climates. And then the biosphere is the entire Earth. Okay, let's talk about a community. Within the community, we look at two different factors. One is species richness and one is species diversity. So the species richness is basically all the various species found in the same environment. So the number of different types of species that you have. If we had a cow, a cat, a dog, a person, and a frog, the species richness would be 5. Because it's 5 different types of species. The species diversity is the relative abundance of the different species within that environment. And it's calculated by this formula here, D being species diversity, and S being species richness. So the diversity is equal to the species richness divided by the square root of N. N is the total number of individual organisms in your sample. You will need to know how to use this particular formula, because the higher the species diversity, the healthier the community is. So let's move on to the next slide, and we will do a little calculation and try to work with some of these. Okay, so let's suppose that we are monitoring 5 species in a particular location. And at the very beginning, which I'm just denoting here as time 0, there are 5 individuals for each of the 6 species. So our species richness, we said, was how many different species were around at the time, right? So time 0, at time 0, the species richness is going to be 6, right? Because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 species. And if you'll remember, we said N was the total number of individuals in the population that we are looking at. So this part's going to be easy. We're going to say 5 times 6, which is 30. Okay, so 30. We are really testing my skills with this little pad here. But anyway, okay, so the diversity that we need to calculate at time 0, we're going to use this formula right here. So we're going to say species richness, which is 6, and we're going to divide that by the square root of 30. Okay, so I'm going to pull out my handy dandy calculator over here. Oh, oops, which is deciding not to work for me for a quick minute. And we are going to say 30, and I'm going to take the square root of that. Let's see what I got here. And I come up with 1.2 1. So this is equal to 1.1. There's a point there. Okay, so now let's go back, and now we're going to look at it at time 5. So the population at 5 years after that looks like we have lost a species here. Species 1 is gone. We don't know, maybe it had a disease that spread throughout the species. We don't know. But so now our species richness, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our species richness has gone down. And our total number of species at time 5, we're going to calculate that. So we're going to say 2 plus 8 plus 2 plus 10 plus 20 gives us 42. So we're going to put 42 right here. And then we're going to plug that into our formula. We're going to have 5 divided by the square root of 42. And let me put that into my handy dandy calculator. We're going to say 5 divided by the square root of 42. And that is equal to 0.77. 0.77. So in this particular case, we would say that our species diversity was higher at time 0 than it was at time 5. So it looks like this community's health is in decline. We don't know why yet, but that is what you get from that part right there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about habitat. So habitat is the space in which a species lives and reproduces. So it can be as small as a fallen log, such as where these fungi are living and along with their moss friends, or it can be as large as the plains of Africa. And let's not forget about our underwater habitats and our underground habitats. Along with our habitat, we want to talk about the niche. So the habitat was the space in which a species lives and multiplies. A niche is the role that a species plays in its community. And so that includes its methods of survival like nutrition and reproduction. And so that niche is determined by two things. It's determined by abiotic factors such as weather, terrain, habitat availability, or it's also determined by biotic factors such as competition, food availability, mate availability. And so when we look at those things, we can actually divide the niche into two different things, either the fundamental niche or the realized niche. So a fundamental niche is all the abiotic factors which support a given species in the absence of the negative biotic factors. So basically, all the physical places are right for this particular organism, so everything's great. The realized niche is that fundamental niche, and then you add in the negative biotic factors. So, for instance, the environment may be perfect for this animal, but the fundamental niche is there, but the realized niche means that there are predators in that region as well. So it may not be as perfect as the fundamental niche. So here are the main abiotic factors that affect niche. Temperature, rainfall, sunlight, and type of soil. And these can change over time, such as climate change, or can change suddenly, such as a sewage spill or an oil spill, and immediately affect the population density and the population richness. Now, the biotic factors affecting a community are competition, predator-prey relationships, and symbiotic relationships. So we're going to go through those kind of quickly. Let's start with competition. Okay, competition. When members of different species try to use a resource that is in limited supply. So competition can be for resources that are obvious like water or sunlight, or things that are slightly less obvious, such as particular minerals in the soil. And it's almost never just one resource that species are competing for. They tend to compete for a variety of resources. And note that these items have to be in limited supply. If there was an unlimited amount, then there's no reason to compete. Okay, so competition demands that these resources are in limited supply. So the competitive exclusion principle came to be when somebody was studying a couple of different a couple of different bacteria at the same time, and the principle essentially states that no two species can occupy the same niche at the same time indefinitely. So for instance, in our chart over here, let me get out my little pointer. When we look at the blue species, we're just going to call it that and make it simple. On its own, it grows well, and then it levels off, and it looks like it's going to go that way indefinitely. And then same thing happens with our yellow species, right? Grown in the same, it's an auger plate. So grown in the same auger plate. Great, it grows until the population density hits a place where it plateaus, and it looks like it's going to be that way indefinitely. When we grow them together, the blue species takes off and plateaus, but the yellow species starts to come up and then drops off. So it looks like the blue species must be a better competitor for the same resources. So both species have the fundamental niche of the auger, but it's only a realized niche for the blue species, the Aurelia. So that's the difference between fundamental and realized niche. So let me say that again. The auger plate is a fundamental niche for both the blue and the yellow species, but it is only a realized niche for the blue species. Okay, because of competition, there are organisms that do what we call resource partitioning. So that's in order to reduce the competition. The resources are kind of partitioned, leading to an increase in niche specialization, so that the niches don't overlap as much, so there's not as much competition. So in this instance, there are 5 species of warblers that eat spruce tree caterpillars. Now, all of these warblers have the ability to eat these caterpillars from any portion of the tree. However, over time, they have developed behaviors such that they only eat those caterpillars from certain places on the tree. So this particular bird here only eats the caterpillars from this section of the tree. They never come to the top. They are perfectly capable of eating the caterpillars at the top, but they have behaviorally adapted so they only use the portion on the bottom. And then by comparison, this one right here only eats the caterpillars from the very top. So that is resource partitioning. It reduces competition. It's a method of reducing competition that is set by behavior. Okay, the second biotic factor is predator-prey interactions. And this is something you are probably all familiar with. Snowshoe hares and the Canadian lynx are a prime example. And so their population density is dependent on one another. So if there's a decline in the available prey, then the predator population will decline. And vice versa can also be true as well. If there's a large amount of predators, then the prey population may not survive. So the density of each population tends to fluctuate based on a number of factors, biotic and abiotic. For example, infection of the prey population may cause a decrease in numbers and therefore a decrease in the predator as well. Or if there's a loss of habitat for the predator, that may cause an increase in the prey population. So the two are always linked. So prey tend to have unique ways of defending themselves against their predators, just to ensure the survival of the species. So we're just going to quickly take a look at some of these. You'll be familiar with a lot of them. camouflage, warning features, association with other prey, and mimicry. Love this picture because this spider is so well hidden. Camouflage allows it to hide itself from its predators. Warning can be either coloration or it can be display or behavior that it has learned that scares off the predator. So the lionfish, for instance, tend to puff itself out really large, make itself look bigger and scary to scare off its predators. The middle is a poison dart frog. So it has, based on insects that it eats, it holds onto toxins, and those toxins actually stay in its skin. So predators learn very quickly, if you eat these, you're going to be very sick or you could die. And then, of course, a rattlesnake does have that sound. It rattles to say, hey, you're in my way. I'm going to bite you if you come and you try to hurt me. So we do have all kinds of warning in that sense. Association, I can't talk today, with other prey. So a prey can make itself look much larger by associating itself with others. So there's safety in numbers, right? I look at this picture and I think I would hate to be that scuba diver because it just looks like this huge ball of fish. That is not something I would want to be a part of. Okay, and then mimicry. If imitation is the highest form of flattery, bees certainly are highly flattered. Mostly because predators tend to know that bees are going to sting you. So bees and yellow jackets, of course, can do that, but they have this yellow and black stripe that basically goes ahead and warns its predators, I can sting you. Most either poisonous insects or harmful insects or flowers tend to be very bright as a warning. And so the flower fly and the longhorn beetle said, hey, I want to pretend like I can be dangerous because if my predator thinks that I'm one of these others, it might leave me alone. Okay, symbiotic relationships. Symbiotic relationships come in 3 different types. There's parasitism, commensalism, and mutualism. So in parasitism, that's a type of symbiosis where only one organism is benefited. The other one is either harmed or killed. We know about parasites. That makes sense. Commensalism is a symbiotic relationship in which one of the organisms is benefited and the other one is really neither harmed nor destroyed. And then mutualism, which is what we usually mean when we say symbiotic relationships, means that both of the species have a benefit. So in this image right here, we have this lovely ox and this, I forget the type of bird. Oh my gosh, it just escaped me. Well, anyway, the bird tends to ride on the back of the ox and will eat off any bugs that come. So the bird gets fed because it eats bugs, and the ox gets all of its parasites removed. So this is a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. Okay, so those are the biotic factors. We've finished with that. So we are going to move on to ecological succession. And what that means is a change within a community involving a series of species replacements. So that means you've got a set of species, and over time, we start replacing some of those species, which then impacts the next set. So then we get a new set of species, and so on and so forth. And this falls under 2 different categories. Excuse me. There's primary succession, and basically primary succession means there's no community that's already present. It's establishing a community from scratch. So it's the formation of soil from rock by abiotic factors. That's how we start primary succession. Secondary succession is basically repairing a community. It's succession in which there is a progressive change from one species to the next, and it occurs where soil is already present. So it begins when there's a disruption in the community. So this is just a quick way to remember it. the difference between primary and secondary succession. Primary succession is on the left. So if we look at it and say, was there soil present? Nope, that's primary succession. Was there soil already present? Yes, then that is secondary succession. Okay, this should look familiar to you because we have talked about soil production before, but we're going to talk about it from the angle of primary succession. So this is where we have no soil already present. So say after volcano section, or I'm trying to think when else that might occur. That's the biggest one, is when you have a volcano and you're starting a new place. Or if you're looking at a smaller community, it may just be a rock itself, and then we're going to start a community on that, the primary succession. So how is soil made? Let me grab my pointer again. So soil is going to be made through several things. We always start with our raw material, which is rock, always rock. And through weathering, lots of rain or grinding because of glaciers is also weathering. Even sometimes when you have a lightning bolt strike, it can start to break apart the rock. So that starts the soil production. The hydrosphere, basically meaning water. I think we just talked about most of these. But the biggest thing is that it takes time to create soil. And in fact, on average, it takes roughly 15 years to produce 1 inch of soil. So if you think about how long that takes, that means what we then will call soil a non-renewable resource. And the reason for that isn't because it doesn't get made again, but because it takes so long to make it that you can't produce it as quickly as it can be used up. Okay? So it's a non-renewable resource. Once we have our soil, then of course it comes in the 3 different types: sand, silt, and clay. And we've talked about that before, sand being the largest particle and clay being the smallest. And then of course we have to take into account the chemistry of the soil. So remember, our cation exchange capacity indicates the availability of negative charge sites on the soil to bind positive cations. So remember, sandy soils have less CEC than clay. Clay has the highest. Okay, so that is soil production. This is just another way to demonstrate that. We have the parent material is always going to be rock, and then through various methods, then we get to our soil that has minerals and nutrients and of different size particles and all of that. We learned about that, so I'll move on from that. Okay, so stages of primary succession. Once we have started breaking down the rock due to weathering and that sort of thing, the first stage for primary succession is going to be lichens coming in. We studied lichens, if you remember, that is a symbiotic relationship, mutualistic symbiotic relationship between a fungi and an algae or cyanobacteria. Okay, so that is the first stage. Then next we come in and we get the shrub stage. So these are very low growing bushes. Also sometimes you have grass stages, but typically at this stage for primary succession we're doing shrub stage. After that, and the reason that we move on to the next thing, let me back up a bit. So the lichen helps to break down the minerals in that rock to make them available for the plants to come in and live. So once it starts creating soil, then we can get the really small, tiny plants that can grow in that shallow soil. And then for a while, we're going to spend time in that stage. And as these plants die, they're going to drop their leaves, and that material is then going to be decomposed by decomposers and make a new layer of soil. So that's going to go on for a long time. Once the soil gets thick enough, then we're going to start the low tree stage. Okay, so smaller trees that can live in that soil that was created by the decayed material from the shrub stage. Keeping in mind that whatever rock was present then determines the lichens that are present, and when the lichens break down those minerals, the shrub stage, only certain types of plants are going to grow in that particular type of soil and that particular environment. So those abiotic factors are very important for which plants actually begin this primary stage of succession. And then of course that determines the low shrub stage, the low tree stage. After that, then we move on to the high tree stage. So those are the 4 steps in primary succession. So this was just really cool. It's a study done by William S. Cooper in Glacier National Park, and it followed primary succession over decades. So in 1921 is where we start, and here's this boulder in the center, and as we watch it progress through the different years, you can see we start out with nothing, and we have some lichen coming in, and then we have these tiny little plants. As they die, then we start getting some shrubby material, some slightly taller shrubby material, and then you'll see we get some low trees, and here's that boulder right back there. And then by the time we get to 2017, you can't even see that boulder because it's been covered by trees. So that is a great study on primary succession. And if we look over here on the right, we have something very similar. We're looking at the same plot, A versus B. So the photo in A was taken in 1941, and the same exact place is captured in 2016. Excuse me. So you can see the difference in the communities over time. Okay, secondary succession. Remember we said that comes when there's an initial disturbance and there's already soil present. So that initial disturbance can be anything from forest fires to land clearing. Most commonly studied is what we call old farm succession. So that's after the field has been plowed under, and then we follow the succession patterns until it reaches a mature forest again. So in our picture here, we've started with a forest fire, and it's taken out most of the plants, and then we have soil left. So what comes in to start with is what we call annual plants. These are the plants that only last a year and then die. And when they do that, of course, they enrich the soil. And then we get our grasses and our perennials, and then slowly we get in shrubs and pine trees. Pine trees are trees that require a lot of sunlight. So they don't grow in shady areas very well. So they can grow when grasses have been there and start to shoot up. Now what happens when the pine trees grow is they provide some shade, and when they do that, then the oaks and the hickories start to come in because they like it slightly shadier and for their seedlings. So then they grow, and it eventually matures into a hickory and oak forest. So something to note is that secondary succession begins with what we call pioneer species. Those are the first producers to inhabit a community after a disturbance. So your mosses, your lichens, your fern, and your weeds, those are considered your pioneer species. So F. Clements proposed a theory, and it's called the climax theory of succession. And what that means is that a particular area will always lead to a mature and stable community. And that mature and stable community is based on two things. It is dependent on the climate and soil conditions. So the climate determines what type of community develops, and the soil conditions affect that resultant community. So each stage of succession facilitates the invasion and replacement by organisms of the next stage. So, for example, if you have a tropical rainforest that develops, that's based on the climate, the warm weather, the large amounts of rainfall, or if you have a tundra that develops, that's because of the high altitude and cold weather and low rainfall. And then the pH of the soil and the minerals that are present also determine which pioneer species are present, and that determines the rest of the species that inhabit the area. Like we mentioned before, the pH of the soil and the minerals that are present may allow for specific type of mosses to grow, and then those mosses affect the soil in a very distinct way that allow only specific grasses to grow there. So the soil conditions and the climate determine what that mature and stable community will look like. But in that same area, no matter how many times you disturb the soil and you start again, you will always come to the same mature and stable community. That is the climax theory of succession. So, like we looked at before, we have the grasses, the low shrubs, the high shrubs, mixed trees, low trees, high trees, and then climax community. Each species in here, from left to right, changes the environment in which it lives, making it optimal for the next group of species to come in and replace it. Sorry. Do you remember when we watched the video about the plants and how they change the pH of the soil so that they can absorb the iron? Well, every plant does that. They adjust the soil to what they want, and that allows for a new species to come in after it that likes that soil type. So I want to take a minute for us to look at longleaf pines. They are specific to the eastern part of North Carolina, as well as several places in the southeast. And their ideal soil conditions are created by grasses. So the saplings grow very rapidly and become tall, and they outcompete other species for sunlight. And then as the saplings grow, shade is created, and would be a great opportunity for hardwoods such as oaks to enter and further the succession process, right? This is the process we've been seeing over and over again. However, longleaf pines halt succession in their favor. And the way they do that is because they are fire dependent. Longleaf pines require fire to open their cones and to start their seeds germinating. And the trees themselves are fire resistant to cool fires, whereas hardwoods are not, which would, so if a fire comes, it allows for a lack of competition. And so natural fires occur that are due to lightning, especially in the southeast. Happens over and over again. So if left alone, natural fires occur about every several years. So when it does, the longleaf pines are at the perfect stage to open their cones, start their seed germination, and now you've just wiped out their competition. So when natural fires occur on a regular basis, they are very cool fires. And what I mean by that is usually fires burn based on the leaf litter that's on the ground. And as you probably know, pine needles burn very quickly. And they don't burn super hot. Now, if we halt the naturally occurring fires, then leaf litter builds up on the forest floor and gets very thick. And if that's the case, then those fires tend to burn very hot. So Once we have a longleaf pine forest and then the hardwoods start to begin to grow, so they have saplings coming up, when you have a natural fire that occurs, the pine trees, the bark is resistant to fire. Now the canopy, meaning the very tops of the trees, those are not resistant to fire. So as long as we have fire every couple years, then we have a cool fire that burns that only the longleaf pines can handle, and it outcompetes the hardwoods that would naturally come in. So longleaf pines are very cool in that they can halt succession in their favor. So this is what happens when natural fires are suppressed. There's too much fuel on the floor and it leads to very hot fires, and that would take out all the vegetation, not just the pine trees, but the hardwoods as well, the grasses, and then we'd have to start all over again with secondary succession. So without fire altogether, then we lead to a hardwood forest as our climax community. So some species have an unusually strong impact on the community structure, preserving the balance of the community or even making its existence possible. And the longleaf pine is one of those species, and these are called keystone species. So what about the animals? So far all we've talked about are plants. Well, the reason we've only talked about plants is because the plants are always the pioneer species. They are the autotrophs. So the animals follow whatever plants come in. So if it is a plant that our herbivores eat, then they're going to migrate and come into that area. And then, of course, that affects the rest of the food web. So that's why I haven't focused necessarily on animals, because the plants are what starts the succession, and then the animals just follow. One thing I do want to talk about through an ecosystem or through a community is that the energy flow flows through the system, and that always requires solar energy. And the reason for that is because of this 10% rule. About 10% of energy is lost at each trophic level. So from our primary producers to our primary consumers, we'll lose about 10% of the energy. Some of it's lost as heat. Some of it's, even through waste, you have heat that's lost also. So there's always a requirement of solar input. So looking at the two laws of thermodynamics, first law of thermodynamics is energy is neither created nor destroyed, but can only be transferred or transformed. So we transfer it from one trophic level to the next, but that 10% is lost in the form of heat. The second law of thermodynamics, everything moves towards chaos or entropy. And in terms of our energy, that means as energy is transferred between trophic levels, some of it is going to be lost in heat, which is an unusable form. So therefore, a constant inflow of energy from the sun is required to maintain living things on Earth. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how energy flows through communities. There's also just chemical cycling that occurs within a community or within a habitat. So water, carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, all of those cycle through a community. Okay, so let's just look at nitrogen as an example. So to start with, we have nitrogen in the form of gas in the atmosphere, and that is not a usable form. So as we've talked before, we have nitrogen-fixing bacteria in nodules of certain plants that allow it to be changed into usable forms. And once it's in a usable form, then it can be taken up by the plants. And then, of course, our herbivore is going to eat it. Our herbivore can either be eaten by other animals, or it may die and it's been put back in the soil for decomposers, and it goes through this cycle all over again. It can also go through denitrifying bacteria, which then will take it back through, either can go through water or straight from soil, but back into the air again. And then there are also cyanobacteria that absorb it, and as they decompose, or you turn it into usable form, then it can go through the phytoplankton and back into the biotic community within the water. So there are all kinds of ways that various chemicals can cycle through various communities. And then also, so just to kind of summarize, ecosystems are dynamic. They're constantly changing. They can be disturbed and have to restart at any given moment through secondary succession. And then they're affected by a multitude of biotic and abiotic factors. And there are some general commonalities that allow us to name specific ecosystems. And that's where a balance is maintained, so we can say, oh, I know about that particular ecosystem. And we are going to talk a little bit more about that next time. See you then.